It's that time of week. It's Friday, the end of the week. That was the week of October the 29th, 2021. And I apologize for my bad joke here. But Keith, it was a meta week. And by the way, I'm not Keith Tier and you're not Andrew Keene, I hope. I think you've got our names the wrong way around.
You know what it is, Andrew, is you came in first today, and I usually come in first. And
I always come in
first
first.
goes on the
I'm
left.
always first.
There you go. That's what I hear, but not necessarily something to boast about.
Thank you. Yeah, well.
But yeah, dear viewers, he is Andrew Keene, and I'm Keith Tier.
And it's been a meta week, Keith, hasn't it?
It's been a hell of a meta week. Let's
How'd they
show
come up with that dumb name?
Metaverse, obviously.
So do they own Meta.com? I wonder where they bought it from.
I don't think they do own Meta.com.
They must own it.
Do you think? Should we do a test?
I mean, can you imagine if you owned Meta.com, how much you could ask them for it?
Meta
100 mil?
Let's check.
Meta.com.
Yes, they do. It
redirects
to about.facebook.com.
That must be the most valuable URL now in the world. Someone
Metaverse will be social.
Won the lottery. I hope they cashed out and they didn't just sell. So we've been predicting this now, Keith, for a while, certainly 2 or 3 weeks. We've been hearing that Facebook is about to de-Facebook itself. Is this for real? Have they really gone from social media to the metaverse, or is it all marketing spin?
Well, they've repainted the house, Andrew, or the book. They've recovered the book, is what they've done, because they have to for many, many reasons.
As MJ Siegler pointed out a couple of weeks ago, Facebook was probably done in 2015, and it's certainly done in October 2021.
It's it's done in the same way that lots of big companies have been done, like Microsoft was once done as well, and it now isn't. So what's really going on here underneath the covers is, well, firstly, I think you have to look.
Speaking of coming first, right?
Exactly. Let's talk about what Zuckerberg thinks he's doing, and then let's separately talk about what he's actually doing. I think what he thinks he's doing is roughly what he did when he acquired Instagram and then WhatsApp, which is he's positioning his company for what comes next and to own what comes next. And in the case of mobile, he failed. Apple and Google clearly won who owns mobile in terms of controlling the user experience. Facebook's just an app on mobile. And in that sense, relegated.
But, I mean, that's an easy thing to say. I mean, Apple and Google own the operating systems. Facebook couldn't have done that. I mean, even in the best case scenario, you're not going to have a Facebook app store.
Well, they tried to do a Facebook phone. Do you remember?
Yeah, but they're never going to be able to compete against iOS or Android. That's not realistic.
Well,
I mean, even in the best case scenario, that never would have happened.
Yeah, but remember,
I'm not defending Facebook, but they did make the transition to mobile certainly much more successfully than Microsoft made the transition to the internet.
Oh, way more. Yeah, way more. I mean, buying Instagram and WhatsApp were masterstrokes, actually, that staved off early death. That said, remember, we're trying to be Zuckerbergy and not Andrew and Keith. What is Zuckerberg trying to do here? He's trying to own the next user interface to content, which he calls the metaverse. And he has persuaded himself that we're going to all be prepared to either wear face masks and immerse ourselves in a 3D world, or faster than anyone believes, that they'll produce glasses that allow of augmented reality, neither of which seems likely. But I think he probably believes it. I think he's prepared to wait 10 years for the outcome because he's got enough money to do that, and he's prepared to make it a long game. My prediction is this is the same as the interactive television fascination in the middle of the 1990s. It's something that will never come to pass, but he's placing a huge bet that it will.
Well, it's interesting you talk about Apple because after all, back in the mid-90s, everyone was talking about online music being the next big thing, and it was only Jobs and the the iPod that made that real, and it's only Apple that made it real when it comes to smartphones. Apple are investing in virtual reality, aren't they? I mean, they will eventually come up with some sort of wearable device that might make the metaverse more realistic.
Well, they're developing the software tools to create augmented reality today. So you can point your phone at a table and
Mm.
through the camera project a game onto the table and play it, using your phone's camera, which is augmented reality. You can make moving objects on the table. For example, I use the One Football app, and I can lay out for tomorrow when Manchester United play Tottenham. You can use the iPhone to lay out the field and the positions of the players on the field on top of your table or on your floor. So yes, Apple is building the tools, but the problem with augmented and virtual reality is not really the software or the three-dimensionality. It's putting it in the real world is hard, and being able to experience it in the real world is hard. If you're prepared to close yourself off 100%, you can experience it in VR. In AR, no one's successfully demonstrated a good enough quality AR experience for consumers.
But we've talked about this in the past, Keith, as well. I think we talked about it last week. Whether or not the metaverse is for real, does this shift speak to the failure of social media ultimately, or the end of the social media age?
It's both the success and the failure, actually. It's neither one or the other. If you think of how human relations are mediated these days, they're mediated through technology largely. Probably 70 to 80% of everyone's interactions happens through technology, and,
Yeah.
and maybe even more.
Well, yours and
Um,
mine are 100%. We never see each other,
pro-
even though we live up
so
the road.
Right. So let's characterize social media as everything that makes social connection possible. It's pervasive and it's succeeded. Where it's failed for Zuckerberg is that he wants to own everything. He's not happy owning Facebook, an app on an iPhone or on Google. He wants to own everything. Give him some credit there. Good for him to have the ambition. And in
Well,
order
that's
to
what he
own
learned from
everything,
Peter Thiel, right?
yeah. And in order to own everything, he wants to be a monopoly. He wants to be what the antitrust lawyers say he already is. And he knows he isn't. He wants to be a monopoly, which means he has to own the playing board. And I think he's struggling to come up with a,
How
a
secure is
roadmap for
he?
that.
I mean, obviously, he structured his corporation so that he can't be voted out. But I've seen Kara Swisher, for example, now calling for his head, more and more people within tech. Is there a point where his position might become untenable? People said, you've screwed up so many times and you are the symbol of the rottenness of Facebook. You have to go. There is life. There was life after Jobs. We never believed it, but now it's clear. And there's going to be life after Zuckerberg, or life after Musk at Tesla, or life after Bezos at Amazon. I mean, that's just the reality.
I think those are theoretical constructs that make sense only in theory. In reality, he is in a solid position. He can't be ousted. He doesn't want to be ousted. He's basically created a huge playpen for himself for the
But
next.
there are board plots. I mean, stuff
The
happens.
board doesn't have any power.
Yeah, but if he lost the confidence of
He'd
his
fire
senior
them.
people,
He'd fire them.
I I'm not convinced that.
Well, you've got to start with the guy actually believes in himself. I mean, he really thoroughly believes in himself. And when you believe in yourself, whether you're right or whether you're wrong, the next question is, do you have the power? And in his case, the answer is yes. I had, when I was younger, I had similar ailments. I over believed in myself. I didn't have the power,
You
and I.
still over believe in yourself, but that's another story. How serious should we take this story, Keith? I mean, it's dominated the news because the media is obsessed with Zuckerberg. He's become this symbol of everything that's wrong with tech. Is it just as there was a lot of stuff about Google when they changed their name to Alphabet? It never really changed anything.
Well, the reason I've titled this "Nothing to See Here" is to answer your question. We shouldn't take it seriously at all. in terms of a real thing, but we should take it seriously in terms of the tactics and strategy of Facebook on navigating its present situation. There's both cynical ways of understanding that, like changing the focus of attention, and then there's probably more likely to be true ways of thinking about it, which is Zuckerberg really does believe he can invent this future. And the number of times yesterday he used the phrase, "This is ways out there," meaning it's not going to happen soon, means he does have some self-awareness that it's very distant future. But I think he thinks it's within a time frame he can deliver. So there's some hubris there as well.
If someone came up with a new technology which enabled you to enter the metaverse without having to put on clunky glasses and look like Robert Scoble, is that more conceivable?
No, I don't think so.
I mean, even if it gets implanted in our eyeballs and we're in the metaverse.
Well, to be honest, the way I think of it is rather than us leaving the real world and going into this digital equivalent, what's more likely to happen with AR is that the real world will become digital. So, for example, you could stand outside my house. If my house was for sale, you could see a little sign and the data would come up. So the real world would become engageable with
But that's
rather.
essentially already happened. All you got to do is go to Zillow, right?
It's potentially already happened, but we don't yet have the ability to overlay data on the physical world. That will come before the metaverse comes. That will come, and then
Well, sorry, go on.
then I think the real world becomes more interesting and learnable from and interesting. Imagine a historical site where everything to do with the history of the site is available to you at the site. It gets kind of interesting if the real world becomes the canvas rather than leaving the real world behind and joining this digital world.
And meanwhile, and there's been a lot of press about this, can Zuckerberg make young people interested again in Facebook or even Instagram, or has he lost the younger demographic? Is social media really now like AOL or Yahoo was after Web 1.0? Has it become a place for old-fashioned people, tech laggards?
I think for now that's true. The jury's out whether that stays true. My 14-year-old, for example, has one of the VR face masks. He used it 3 times and has never used it again. It was a curiosity, not something he was interested in repeating.
No, I don't mean VR. I mean Facebook itself, the social
Oh, I
media.
see. I just think it becomes irrelevant. It doesn't go away because people are still going to use it because it's got some useful functions, but it just doesn't become where the next big thing takes place.
Well, the next big thing, Keith, the real thing this week seems to be what Sequoia, one of the Valley's major, most credible and interesting, most persistently correct venture capital firm, is doing. Why is Sequoia changing venture capital? You've talked about the end of venture capital now for months, and now it suddenly seems to be really happening.
Well, it's been trickle, 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 flood, and this week was the flood. What Sequoia did, and for those who are not familiar with the way venture capital works, venture capitalists raise funds, invest them, and then raise another fund and invest that. And so typically, long-standing funds like Sequoia have got 10, 12 funds historically under
Which make them
management.
incredibly confusing from the outside. They're impossible to figure out. And unless you're an insider, they're a mystery, essentially.
Yeah, and even worse, each fund is its own business model. So if you were an investor in the WhatsApp fund, you would have done way better than if you were an investor in a prior fund.
Mm.
So what Sequoia's decided to do is to abandon the fund business altogether and replace it with a company structure, putting all the assets of the funds into a single company, which would collectively be worth about $45 billion today. And then to ask people to own equity in that company by putting money into it and leave it up to Sequoia to decide what to do with the money down below.
It seems
Thus,
like a no-brainer. I mean, you've been predicting this, as I said, for a long time. Why has it taken so long to come to this, seeming to me as an outsider, fairly obvious way forward?
I think it's just the history of venture capital. The first people to do this were the private equity firms, the asset managers, people like BlackRock and Carlyle, who saw public listings in their case as a way to get both asset management and liquidity and a trading stock price. Now venture slowly has been going in this direction. It was Draper in England, Draper Esprit, and Kinnevik in the Nordics, both listed. Andreessen Horowitz last year changed from being a venture fund to being what's called an investment advisor, allowing them to make a broader range of decisions with what to do with their money. And now Sequoia's there. Most of the industry still isn't there, actually. This will have been a shock to many, many venture capitalists.
Is this it's sort of in 19th century political terms? Is this like the unification of Germany or Italy? It makes nationhood inevitable, and ultimately all the other funds need to follow through and copy them.
The ones that can, you have to be big to do this.
Why?
Because the assets you need to have to be able to leverage them into what's called permanent capital, the ability to invest permanently in the future, you need a lot of assets under management initially.
Yeah. And
funny enough,
and you've talked also in the past, Keith, about I wouldn't use this word inevitability, but the likelihood that these venture funds will do IPOs. Do you think one of the reasons for Sequoia's move is that they might consider an IPO in the not too distant future?
In their announcements, they explicitly ruled that out. They said they are not going to list. Now, because they're so big, it is possible for a private company to offer liquidity privately to its investors if it has the assets to do so. And once you have 45 billion, you can use debt and equity to create that leverage without necessarily needing to be publicly listed. For me, the benefits of public listing are more to do with democratizing the index, to make it possible for ordinary people to benefit from the expertise that Sequoia has. So I strongly favor public listing, and you know this, Andrew, but I'm currently trying to raise $1 billion through various phases, not all at once, to create a publicly listed index fund on top of the seed stage, which is kind of similar to what Sequoia is doing later stage.
Right. But you also, in your newsletter this week, you talk about how Sequoia and Andreessen Horowitz, they're also getting into the seed business.
Yeah, that's my wife, Shanae, wrote actually a fantastic piece, very well researched, long, about what's been happening in seed investing over 3 generations of seed investing. And the takeaways are, number one, seed investing is now huge, 23,000 companies in every 3-year period, as opposed to only 3,000, 2 cohorts ago. And secondly, the amount of money that's going into seed has grown, the number of funds investing in seed. But now these big guys are coming back and also raising seed funds to compete with the pure seed fund managers. That's what leads to a competition between the seed stage managers and the venture or growth managers.
Sorry, go on. And will the need for an IPO for a Sequoia or an Andreessen, will that be driven by them trying to take on a Tiger Global or a SoftBank, because otherwise they won't have the resources, the capital?
I personally think that's an inevitable outcome, but they're saying not. So let's wait and see. They definitely have the assets to not have to do that in their case, but they're one of a kind.
Who's most nervous about this? Would it be Tiger and SoftBank? Is it really about Sequoia trying to catch them up?
No, I think, Tiger this week announced an $8.8 billion raise against a $10 billion fund. So they're not scared. They can all compete. I think it really comes down to, there's more than one fight going on. The first fight is who owns the growth stage. And in that, yes, they're competing with Tiger and Coatue and Insight and SoftBank. The second fight is there even still such a thing as a venture stage, the middle stage? The answer probably is no.
Well,
and because these big companies will squeeze out the venture guys. and or turn them into boutiques. And then the third fight, and the one I'm most interested in, is does the seed stage survive, or is it taken over by these big guys? I think the seed stage does survive, but it will take large amounts of capital wisely put through the seed stage into their best companies for
Well,
that
there's
to
always going to
conclude.
be an opportunity for smart seed investors. I mean, that's inevitable. These big companies can't access everything. Will all this potentially result in there being more M&A activity in the venture business? Because that never seems to happen either.
Yeah, it doesn't really happen because of the fund structure. What
Mm.
normally happens is when a manager of a fund wants to leave, somebody comes and buys out their position in the fund at some multiple of its current value, usually a discount to the current value of their shares. So, John Doerr, for example, could leave Kleiner Perkins, and he could be bought out as he left if he wanted to be by somebody that's prepared to buy him out. So it was individual. It's like a partnership in an accounting firm or a law firm. You could be bought out. Um, Once these entities become companies, then M&A becomes possible. And that's already happened with BlackRock. It's made a number of acquisitions.
Interesting stuff. And that's real as opposed to Facebook, which is all speculative, all meta.
Yeah,
Uh,
Facebook changed nothing this week. Sequoia changed everything.
yeah, no, I'm not sure if Facebook changed nothing. I think just by doing it, they changed something, but it's not real. What about startup of the week, Keith? That's been changing stuff for a while now.
Yeah, startup of the week this week, and it's almost always, by the way, not a startup because I pick things that kind of stand out, and it's not always a startup. But this week, it is not Hertz.
I
It
thought it
is.
was Hertz when I first saw that.
It's the headlines here are funny enough. They're using a Hertz picture, but Uber is going to rent 50,000 Tesla EVs to drivers, and Hertz is going to buy 100,000 Teslas in the single largest purchase ever. If we go to Google Finance and we look at Tesla's um, week in its stock, let's just go to 5 days. It's gone from under $1,000 to well over 1,100. It's now valued at $1.07 trillion, which means it's worth more than all the other car companies in the world put together. So
Yeah.
that is quite a testament, and so they had to be my startup of the week.
I mean, I remember 2 years ago, every conversation I had was about the inevitable demise of Tesla and Musk. Whatever you think of the guy, he's remarkable. He is. If anyone is carrying Jobs' mantle, it's Musk, isn't it? Miracle worker. What
Yeah,
he's
it's
done
very.
is astonishing. And my sense is he did it by essentially sleeping in the factory.
He's an intensely geeky. I think he's probably on the spectrum.
Well, it's like
Uh,
Jobs, probably.
I think Jobs was more kind of LSD art meets marketing chutzpah meets tech. Jobs was more my kind of guy, to be honest. I could have dinner with Jobs and enjoy it. With Musk, I wouldn't know what to talk about. I'd have to let him do all the talking because
Well,
I'd be.
I think you'd probably have to let Jobs do the talking too. But certainly, if you have to choose between Musk and Thiel, it's always going to be Musk, isn't it?
I don't know Thiel well enough, but I think that's a good instinct.
But it is a remarkable story, Tesla. And my sense is they're over the hump now. I mean, this is for real. This is not speculative. It's not just a lot of kids buying Tesla stock because they love Elon Musk.
No, he's solved a whole bunch of technical issues. He's built. I mean, imagine what it takes to build manufacturing worldwide at the scale he's doing it. It's just phenomenal.
And they have so much capital now, you have to assume that they'll start acquiring companies. At some point, do they start rolling up the rest of the car business? They acquire Volkswagen or Ford?
They probably don't want or need to acquire them. I think they
Well, for scale reasons to just produce.
manufacturing plants are interesting, but not for the cars or for the
And what
designs.
about the battery side? How much is that driving the price, or is it just the vehicles?
Today, Tesla buys batteries mainly from Panasonic. It is going to produce its own batteries, and we'll see where that goes. But the first batch of those is more efficient than the ones they've been using so far and takes the cars further just by changing the batteries. So, yeah, they're going to be in battery production, and they're also selling batteries to the other car manufacturers now.
Well, Thiel famously said about Web 2.0, you promised us flying cars, and we got 160 or 140 characters. I mean, with Tesla, we have something real, and we can tell from the UN conference this week in Glasgow about the environment. This is a really not only a very valuable and dynamic company. It's not really a Silicon Valley company. It's a company of enormous historical significance. Finally, Keith, tweet of the week. What do we got this week?
Just before I do the tweet, I should just tell you that Li Auto, one of the competitors to Tesla in China, did actually show off a flying car this week.
Well, that's not unrealistic. The flying car, isn't? Didn't Hoffman invest in one of those companies?
Yeah, he did. Yeah. So tweet of the week this week. It's a bit of an obscure one. Let me click on it and it'll take us there.
It's not Paul Graham, is it?
It's Fred Wilson,
Ooh.
but it's a kind of an inside baseball tweet to Chris Dixon, who is at Andreessen Horowitz, saying to Chris, "Have you ever said or written, quote, come for the assets, stay for the experience?" And obviously lots of innuendo there.
What does that mean? I mean,
Well,
it's a clever tweet, but I don't know what it means.
well, it pertains to this article he wrote, which is Web3 versus Web2, which is why I used it, because we keep talking about Web3, and I've made the point a few times that Web3 is being written as we speak. It's not a finished idea yet. So Fred has this whole contrast between Web 2 and the decentralized consumer applications of Web 3. And he makes the point that in Web 2, people came for the tools and stayed for the network. That was Chris Dixon saying that back in the day in a blog post long time ago. And Fred's making
The
this
tools
point.
were only valuable because of the network.
Yeah. And he said, and what Fred's saying is these days people come for the token or the asset, like Dogecoin, and then learn what it can do and go from there. So it's kind of trying to understand consumer behavior in Web3, which is led by speculative coin purchasing or token purchasing.
I mean, I'm interested in your take on Web3. I don't buy it, though, and particularly in the context of the Sequoia news. The laws of economics result in consolidation and winner-take-all economics. So whatever Web3 looks like, it's still going to be dominated by fewer and fewer wealthier and wealthier and more powerful companies or platforms or whatever they are. It doesn't really make any difference.
Well, you're probably right. That would be the smart bet. That said, what would you need to change for that not to be true? The first thing you'd have to get rid of is this idea that's called qualified investors. Right now, in America at least, and in most of the developed world, you have to be rich to be able to invest in early stage things that are speculative. So securities are restricted unless they're public.
Yeah, I take that, but let's just use the example of Uber as the classic Web 2.0 company. Clearly, it's a brilliant idea, and even Facebook has stolen their new company name from it. But it's a centralized company. So the obvious post-Uber company would be drivers aggregating together to create a decentralized network where you wouldn't have an Uber company taking all the profits. It's a no-brainer. Why hasn't that happened? Because clearly the logistics, the scale, the investment, they're just really hard to do.
Yeah, I actually tried to do a startup with a limousine driver a few years ago called Driver Cars, where that was the kind of idea.
I didn't hear about that one.
But here's what you'd have to do. Here's why it hasn't happened yet. Step one, some computer scientists would have to write a blockchain protocol for authenticating ownership of a vehicle, the insurance of the vehicle.
Not hard. We could find probably there are 50 people watching this now who could do that.
So
So
that's step one. Step one, build the blockchain protocol
not
for
hard. Okay, what else?
authenticating the drivers. Step two, create a token that as a rider, passenger, you have to buy in order to take the ride, and create a whole bunch of these tokens up front so the drivers have a liquid token marketplace for the drives. Step three, build the apps on top of all of that that simplify the process just like Uber's app does. So it looks as easy as Uber. Then make it possible for drivers to sign up, for riders to find them, and you're done.
You're done, but it hasn't happened. It's a very interesting idea, and I mean, for Web3 to be real, that has to happen.
I think
Otherwise, it's just an
yeah,
attractive wannabe. You know, it's an idealistic notion that isn't going to happen. But
in a way, NFTs are a version of that. It's hard to see it because you have to abstract up a few levels to see them as in the same world. But NFTs are self-serve artistic pieces deployed all over the world by all kinds of people into all kinds of places. There's tokens that you can use to buy them, and there's blockchains to authenticate that you did buy them and now you own them. And there's no company in the middle.
well, Keith, we have to end. It's August 29th, 2021. Someone
August,
wrote to me this week
August.
saying we can't do a show this week without mentioning Manchester United. Manchester United are playing Tottenham on tomorrow. Both teams are dreadful. Probably United are worse in the sense that they've had more waste of money and the manager is under more pressure, although our manager is pretty awful. Will Solskjaer be around this time next week, Keith?
I don't think there's any real impetus to getting rid of him except in the media. I think within the club, he's a safe pair of hands
Well, you lost
for.
5-0 at home to your biggest rival. What has to happen to get rid of this guy? He clearly doesn't know what he's doing.
And the stock price went up to $19, and the owners, don't really focus on the performance on the field as much as they do the financial performance. So I don't think they think he's doing too much wrong. What do I think? I do think he's a bit of a lightweight for what's needed in that role.
To
I'll
be
be honest.
polite. Web3 needs to catch up with football, but that's another subject. Enjoy the game tomorrow, Keith. I don't know. As I said, I think both teams are dreadful. Our team is shameful, so you probably will win. That's my guess.
Yeah, that's just you. You're hedging your bet so you can gloat tomorrow when my team loses.
I don't even know if it's gloating.
We'll see.
We'll see. Well, good luck tomorrow, Keith, and we'll talk again next week.
Bye-bye.